Hello and welcome, friends. I hope everybody's having a great day so far. If you are new here, welcome. And if you're back, welcome back. I greatly appreciate all of the ongoing support. This is my channel, Dragonsjewel Creative Gems, and I'm Tegan, and I'm just going to get all that wonderful YouTubey stuff out of the way first. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, please consider doing so. It's just down below there. And of course, any love, comments, suggestions, all those wonderful things, there's that comment section down there. And don't forget to hit that like button as well. Today we are going to be doing our Ghostly Echoes series, and we had been going through the province of Alberta. I have now finished up Alberta, and we are moving west to British Columbia, also known as BC. So those will be the next series of ghost stories that we'll be covering starting this episode. We'll see how far we get with those, and I hope you guys enjoy these next few spooky tales. This story takes place in Prince Rupert, British Columbia. A ghostly rescue. When she was new, the Eliza Anderson was as fine a ship as you would have found on the west coast of North America. But by 1897, the Side-Wheeler had served on the Olympia Victoria mail run for nearly 40 years, and she was effectively worn out. Her owners, the Northwestern Steamship Company, floated the aging craft to a holding dock until they could arrange to tow her to the scrapyard. Northwestern Steamship must have not needed the money that they would recover from salvaging the Eliza Anderson, because the abandoned ship was left to rot in a muddy, weed-infested slough. Over the years that she sat there, deteriorating quickly enough through natural causes, her demise was hurried along by vandals and scavengers who stripped many parts from the once proud craft. In August 1897, the ship was brought out of retirement for one last voyage. One destined to sail the Eliza Anderson into a paranormal adventure. Her crew for this trip from Victoria to Alaska via the Inside Passage was a mismatched bunch of soldiers, chosen in great haste and led by a captain named Tom Powers. Potential profit was the only motive for this reclamation, and so only minimal repair work was done to make the neglected and abused ship seaworthy once more. In order to make the venture more financially rewarding, the ship's owners took on not just freight, but also passengers. Most of them were prospectors, fortune hunters, much more interested in finding the golden motherlode than in getting along with their fellow passengers. The Eliza Anderson was not long out of port when serious squabbles began on board. The crew members were fighting among themselves, as were the passengers. Before long, animosity developed between the two groups as well. The trip was apparently not destined to be a pleasant one. Not long after this vessel of discontent passed the port of Prince Rupert en route to Alaska, she ran into a heavy storm. Tempers on board flared even further. It was not until the chief engineer came topside and reported that coal supplies were dangerously low that all those on board the Eliza Anderson realized that this was no time for petty quarrels. If they didn't work together to get the ship of fools safely through the storm, none of them might be alive to tell of it. Captain Powers immediately ordered passengers and crews alike to begin breaking apart anything on board that was flammable and not structurally necessary. If they didn't have coal, then they'd use whatever they could to generate enough steam to get them through this gale. Once a supply of flammable material was stockpiled, the majority of the badly frightened men resorted to the only other helpful activity that they could think of: prayer. It would take divine intervention, they were sure, to keep this badly neglected 40-year-old potential piece of scrap metal from sinking. She was being buffeted badly enough by the high waves to frighten anyone on board. When the force of the storm toppled the smokestack and sent it crashing onto the deck, all on board knew that the storm was stronger than their ship. Those who'd been to sea before knew that such an imbalance was a recipe for disaster. Captain Powers recruited every person in his care to work toward getting the ship through the storm. He ordered some to clean the steam pumps, some to dump oil from their cargo hold onto the waves, with the hope of calming them, and others to work with the rudder. Those not otherwise occupied broke up more wood to stoke the fire. Despite everyone's efforts, the best that Eliza Anderson could manage was to survive standing still as the storm raged around them. The crew had no hope of generating enough power to move away from the weather. All they could do was pray that they would still be floating by the time the storm had either dissipated or moved on. After 2 days and 2 nights of constantly battling the elements, all on board were exhausted. The storm continued to rage around them. No relief appeared to be in sight. The end in the form of certain death for all seemed to be imminent. By the 3rd morning, Captain Powers had lost his bearings. He had no idea which direction was where. The situation was utterly hopeless. There was no way of knowing whether they were going to be buffeted against rocks or how much more of a beating the ship's structure would take from the winds and the waves before she started to crack. Powers knew that moments after either of these possibilities occurred, it would only be a matter of time before crew and passengers alike were all tossed to assured death in a watery grave. Just as their fate seemed inevitable, a soldier on the bridge thought he spotted something through the curtain of torrential rain. He hesitated before announcing his sighting, and he couldn't believe what he was seeing. There appeared to be a small boat approaching on the waves. As it came closer and closer, the sailor was able to make out an outline of a lone occupant in a woefully inadequate craft, rowing with all his might towards the Eliza Anderson. He tied his rowboat to the larger ship's rope, and seconds later, a veritable giant of a man, raw-boned and muscular, was on board the distressed ship. Captain Powers, his crew, and passengers watched in disbelief as the larger-than-life figure took the wheel of the ravaged vessel. Almost imperceptibly at first, and then more obviously, the seemingly doomed ship began moving in a specific direction. No longer was she just being tossed about at the whim of the angry wind. Within hours they'd navigated to the edge of the storm. The seas calmed and the danger lessened. Several hours later, land was in sight. The terrified souls on board the Eliza Anderson were no longer in peril. As silently as he had boarded the ship, the mysterious stranger left. He made his way down a rope ladder to his little craft, untied it, and rowed away. The thoughts of those left behind on the Eliza Anderson immediately turned from the present who steered them to safety to the task of finding help in this isolated location. It was therefore some time before anyone who'd experienced the unexpected rescue was ready to discuss it. By then, many of the people who'd been on the ship had decided that the phantom who piloted them to safety had only been a figment of their collective imaginations. In 1899, an anonymous writer who had been on board the Eliza Anderson and had witnessed the supernatural rescue submitted an article to a newspaper in Seattle. He maintained that he recognized the survivor as the ghost of Captain Tom Wright, who had owned and operated the threatened vessel until his death. He wrote, "Captain Tom's spirit saw our danger. He knew and loved the Anderson, and that was how it happened that a stranger came out of the storm and brought us safely to land. We can never know for sure what happened that stormy, fateful day off the coast of British Columbia. We only know that all on board escaped with their lives, and that having made it to Alaska, the Eliza Anderson never sailed again." This story takes place around Victoria Island, British Columbia. A fiery phantom. The following story is extremely well documented and equally well investigated, yet In the end, even naval authorities had to admit that they had no solution to the mystery. Retrospective assessment seems to indicate that what really occurred was simply a most unusual ghost ship sighting. Early in November 1957, a Japanese freighter, the THRU, steamed south past Vancouver Island towards Seattle. The journey had been uneventful until a deckhand spotted a vessel in extreme distress. It appeared to be a fishing boat entirely engulfed in flames. The captain of the freighter ordered his craft to approach the burning vessel. As the larger craft made her way alongside, the sailors noted a strange white light just above the smaller craft. Stranger still, the light then sped away and disappeared over the horizon. Nevertheless, the THRU launched a rescue boat to assist anyone who might be stranded on the flaming fishing boat. The Japanese delegation determined that the burning boat had already been abandoned, and so simply took note of as many identifying marks on the doomed craft as possible. The sailors reported back to their captain that the boat was roughly 30 meters, 100 feet, in length, and that the portion of its registry number that was still visible indicated that it was a Canadian boat. They estimated that such a vessel would have required a crew of no fewer than 10 to operate her. The captain of the THRU reported his sighting to the authorities, who were not completely surprised. Several sailors had already told of seeing a bright light of unknown origin in the area at that time. Perhaps the official reason the witnesses had spotted the glow from the burning boat. The officials next had to determine which boat it was that had been destroyed by flames. Oddly, there were no Canadian vessels unaccounted for. Despite this fact, ships from both the United States and Canada organized an intensive search. For 5 days, the vessels combed more than 30,000 square kilometers, 12,000 square miles, of calm ocean and good weather. They found nothing. No sign of any burnt or burning boat, or of any survivors. An official with the American Coast Guard was so confident of the quality of the search that he stated unequivocally, if anything had been there to find, we'd had found it. To this day, the mystery of the flaming ghost ship off Vancouver Island has still not been solved. This story takes place in Quesnel, British Columbia. Is Mandy possessed? Steve Wallace, the mayor of Quesnel in central British Columbia in the late 1990s, has not said whether he's a believer or a skeptic, but he has called a certain artifact at a local museum a great draw for the community. Other people in the community have committed themselves more fully by asserting that the artifact is possessed. The controversial piece is a doll named Mandy. She is roughly 0.6 meters, 2 feet long, and is estimated to be about 80 years old. She began her residency at a Towns museum in 1991. Earlier that year, Lisa Sorensen of Quesnel found the toy in her grandmother's trunk. She initially intended to keep the doll for herself, but a number of unexplainable and disturbing events changed Lisa's mind. She began to hear a baby crying at night, although no baby was anywhere near. Those phantom cries were accompanied by strange and unexplainable breezes blowing inside the house. When Lisa heard a window slam close and found the spike that was supposed to hold it lying open on the floor, she decided that she'd been associated with the doll for longer than was comfortable. Since Mandy has been in the museum, the numbers of bizarre occurrences, thought to be connected with the decidedly unattractive-looking toy, have increased. No one has any idea who or what possesses the doll, but she has been held responsible for many eerie encounters. Some of them indicate that Mandy does not like having her picture taken. Artifacts acquired by the Quesnel and District Museum must be catalogued and photographed. While experienced museum photographer Cookie Castle was taking shots of the newly acquired doll, she and the friend who was with her during the shoot both felt extremely uncomfortable. In order to get the job done, at least to the point where the film had been developed to produce negatives, the pair tried to ignore their feelings of discomfort. However, as soon as the negatives were hung to dry, they immediately tidied up, locked up, and left the building. The next day, Ruth Stubbs, the museum's curator, described the mess in the developing room as looking like a small child had had a temper tantrum. Ross Mitchell, a photographer with the Caribou Zerber, also had an interesting experience with the photographs that he took at the museum. Although he photographed a number of exhibits, many of the pictures that he took were of Mandy. When Mitchell returned to his office and tried to print off contact sheets of his photographs, the paper never emerged from the developer. The potential pictures simply vanished somewhere inside the machine. While he was attempting to solve this problem, he heard footsteps in the office area above the developing room. Thinking that since he was supposedly alone in the building, there must be intruders. He went up to check, but could not find no source for the sounds. Seth Gottro, a photographer with the Cornell Advocate, also had a bizarre experience trying to take Mandy's picture. He reported that the doll, although it is otherwise apparently an inanimate object, seemed to turn her head away from the lens so that I might not get her on film. Determined nevertheless to complete the shot, he took the doll out of its glass case and sat her on the bed. She seemed to be grinning at me as the flash hit her face. Ruth Tussler, a museum visitor from Calgary, Alberta, tried to videotape the slightly smiling doll. As she was filming, the woman remembered thinking that the doll did not like having her picture taken. Ruth did not have time to dwell on this rather odd thought. However, because an indicator light on the video recorder began to flash intermittently. When she moved along to the next exhibit, the camera worked properly again. Mandy apparently wasn't content with disrupting the woman's filming, though. When Ruth got home and tried to play the videotape, it became wedged in her VCR, and could only be removed forcibly. She never did get to view the tape that she had tried to make at the Cornell Museum. Perhaps one day Mandy will share her secrets with the living. Until then, those who believe that this intriguing artifact hosts a presence will have to be content with their speculations. This story takes place in Victoria, British Columbia. Mysterious manifestations. Appropriately, the Maritime Museum, situated in Victoria's very haunted Bastion Square, is thought to be haunted. Anyone interested in West Coast history, marine history, or ghosts will enjoy their visits here. The building was erected in 1889, replacing the courthouse and jail building that had served Victoria on that site since 1860. The collections in the museum are so effectively compiled and displayed that even the casual visitor comes to appreciate the significance of the sea to British Columbia's heritage. A ghost hunter should definitely not miss a trip to the top floor of the building. Getting there will no doubt be half the fun, for regardless of whether you take the old open cage elevator or the staircase, you might encounter at least one of the ghostly presences in the museum. A restored courtroom depicting the building's early days takes up most of the third floor area. This is where Chief Justice Sir Matthew Bailey Begbie held court. Begbie was widely known and just as widely feared. He earned his nickname, the Hanging Judge, through his propensity for settling legal matters in a very permanent way. Legend has it that he once became so annoyed with a particular jury that he threatened to hang all the jurors. Even today, upon stepping inside his recreated Hall of Justice, a visitor immediately senses that Begbie's presence has not left the place. A few years ago, however, two men had a much more direct encounter with the judge's spirit while they were alone in the securely locked building. The first man, Tom, was a technician with the museum. This particular evening, he brought a friend, Dick, to help him and to keep him company while he finished some chores in the third-floor workroom. As the pair finished up for the night, Tom suggested that his friend head downstairs while he tidied up and locked the room that they'd been using. Dick agreed and started down the staircase. Because the museum was closed, all the rooms off each landing were locked. As he was approaching the main floor, Dick could hear his friend locking up the room that they'd been working in, and then starting down the stairs. Dick was completely surprised, therefore, to feel someone heading up the stairs and brush past him. He whirled around quickly enough to clearly catch sight of a tall, bearded man dressed in black mounting the stairs. Too shocked to speak, Dick stood in amazement, watching and listening as the figure made its way, one step at a time, up the staircase. When Tom joined him on the main floor, Dick immediately inquired as to who the stranger had been. The technician had no idea who or what his friend was referring to. No one had passed him on the stairs. This situation was extraordinarily puzzling, because they both realized that there was nowhere that anyone could have gone to, given that every room in the building was locked. The manifestation was apparently simply dissolved before reaching Tom, although they probably realized even at the time that the image on the stairs had been a ghost. They decided they should do the responsible thing and thoroughly search the building for possible intruders. There were none. The place was as empty and secure as they had presumed it was. The figure that Dick had seen so clearly fits the description of Sir Matthew Bailey Begbye, the hanging judge, who died in 1894. Begbye probably has as much paranormal company as he could want, for Bastion Square is said to be full of spirits. In keeping with the practice of the day, public executions took place right outside that original jail and courthouse. The necessary burials that followed such hangings were more strongly influenced by expediency than respect. As a result, the executed person's remains were often simply interred under nearby paving stones. No wonder people report numerous incidents of ghostly activity. One apparition that is seen over and over again is known as the White Lady. She appears seemingly out of nowhere by the Maritime Museum. She looks quite real until those observing her presence note that she's not walking on the sidewalk, but just above it. People who have followed her report that she crosses the street and then vaporizes before their eyes. Many people believe that the vision is the ghost of the local tavern owner's wife who died in 1861. Apparently the ghost of the harsh Judge Begbye is not content with haunting just the old courthouse, because he is also thought to have haunted a house constructed on a piece of land that he once owned in nearby Saanich, just north of Victoria. Though Begbye never lived there, it is said that he was very fond of the land and that he enjoyed visiting it. He was known to spend hours sitting on a particular boulder as he meditated. Sometimes after his death, the property was sold and the new owners erected a small bungalow there. By the 1950s, that same house was deemed by mediums to be so haunted that it was, in their words, unlivable. There were phantom noises and plagues of pest, such as rodents and insects. An oily silver-colored substance of unknown origin began appearing in the basement. The haunting was so strong that it resisted all attempts at exorcism when the letter M was mysteriously found scratched in a mirror. Those involved with the case wondered if the scratching was possibly the ghost of Matthew Begbye making his identity known. A sequence of photographs taken on the property seemed to answer that query. When a roll of film shot at the house was developed, all the pictures turned out clearly. All except one small section of each picture, that is. As well, a misty column could be seen around the boulder on which the hanging judge liked to rest. The haze in the photo is dense enough to obscure all the features behind it. That mist was not visible to the naked eye at the time the pictures were taken. The photo frame that caused the most concern, though, showed an image of an elderly, bearded man, readily recognizable as Sir Matthew Begbye. All those who had been present attest that there had not been a person meeting that description anywhere near the property when the picture was taken. It would be difficult to find more convincing proof that the old man had not yet left this world completely. Perhaps by now, however, his spirit has moved from the earthly realm to one where hangings are never needed. This story takes place in Vancouver, British Columbia. A phantom roommate. Small, nondescript apartment buildings dot this country's urban landscapes. Although many of these multi-family residences were constructed in the 1950s, they continue to provide adequate accommodation today for those living on a limited budget. One particular apartment block on the West 12th Avenue in Vancouver offered one important added extra. Choosing to live at this address meant that you might have an occasional ethereal visitor. No one has ever been able to figure out who the ghost may have been when he was alive, but at least 3 residents know that as a ghost, at least, he was a companionable sort of fellow. After a period of adjustment, 2 men who shared a suite in the haunted building came to quite enjoy the spirit's presence in their lives. Initially, they had no idea what was causing an apparently sourceless shadow to occasionally appear, and they were frightened by it. Once they realized that the apparition would do them no harm, the pair became quite accepting and even welcoming of their guest. Once that acceptance had occurred, the phantom sometimes also manifested as that strange sensation of not being alone, when reason says that no one else is in the room. The pair of renters might not always be able to see the phantom's form, but they could hear him as he settled into one or another of the chairs in the living room. They soon got into the habit of offering pleasantries to their invisible visitor in order to acknowledge his arrival. Some months later, and for reasons completely unrelated to the ghost, the men moved on. They left the haunted apartment behind, but never forgot the entity, nor the time that they had spent with him. Many years after leaving that apartment, one of the men happened to meet a woman who had also lived in the building. She, too, had stories to tell, stories that were eerily similar to his. It seemed that the phantom traveled from one suite to another, socializing to the best of his ghostly ability as he went. This story takes place in Burnaby, British Columbia. The Fairacres Phantom. The year was 1909, and Western Canada, especially British Columbia's lower mainland, was enjoying a burgeoning economy. New York businessman Henry Caperly and his bride Grace had recently moved to the community Burnaby, now a city within the Greater Vancouver metropolitan area. He was a flamboyant character, but she preferred the quiet life. For 10 years, until her death in 1919, Grace Caperly spent most of her time on the grounds of the beautiful property that her husband had built. Fairacres, as the couple called their mansion, was built beside a lake that attracted the wild birds that Miss Caperly so loved. In addition, the beautiful gardens round the home were her pride and joy. The Caperlys' friends, as well as those in the surrounding community, probably presumed, if they even thought about it, that the couple's wealth had all come from Henry Caperly's businesses. At best, that presumption proved to be only half true, for Miss Capurli's will revealed that she was the sole owner of the house. Even more surprising than that fact was her request for its disposal. Rather than bequeathing the estate to her husband, Grace Capurli requested that the place be sold and that the proceeds be used to construct a children's playground in Vancouver's Stanley Park. Henry Capurli delayed in complying with his wife's request. Whether or not he ever suffered any punishment for his delay is not known. Apparently, though, Fairacres' subsequent residents paid a price for Capurli's selfishness and disrespect. As with the Dunsmuir residences on Vancouver Island, Fairacres became a real estate white elephant. It was so large and grand that even the richest folk would be hard-pressed to maintain such an enormous home. Like Craigdarroch Castle, Robert and Joan Dunsmuir, greatest single monument to their wealth. The Capurlis' former home eventually became a hospital, a place that housed great suffering. The mansion also temporarily reverted to a private residence before becoming home to a mainstream religious order, and then in the late 1950s, a bizarre cult. Much of the grand beauty that Grace Capurli had been so proud of in her home had been destroyed by the subsequent occupants. Next, the once dignified Fairacres became a residence for students at the new Simon Fraser University. Unfortunately, the students did not have a great deal of respect for the mansion, and so its incarnation as a student residence left it badly damaged. Just when there didn't seem to be anything more in the way of indignity that the old place could suffer, it was rescued, purchased by the municipality of Burnaby, now a city. After a considerable restoration effort and expense, the Burnaby Art Gallery, BEG, opened at Fairacres in 1967. The first reports of a ghost were not far behind. A nighttime security guard told of seeing a female apparition wearing a long white dress flowing that was clearly from another era. If the old-fashioned clothing had not given him a clue that he was witnessing something most unusual, the image's slight transparency certainly must have. He watched in fascination as the spirit made her way down the stairs from the third floor. Many other employees from that early era of the BEG initially reported seeing a misty figure, but when pressed by the media, decided that they were not willing to talk about it. Some people have been more forthcoming, though. Maria Guerrero, for instance, reported that she was stunned to learn that the building's third floor was unoccupied, for she had distinctly heard noises which had indicated to her that there was someone living up there. Another employee, Carol Defina, also heard the ghost, or rather the swishing of the ghost's skirts. The women made effort not to look in the direction from which the sounds came and left the building immediately. Often when such phantom noises have been heard, the people hearing them searched the building for intruders, but found none. Henry Capurli may have come back to apologize for his wrongdoing, for the ghost of a man has also been seen in the art gallery. He too has been heard walking about and has been seen at the top of a staircase. It is presumed that his ghost is the one responsible for moving tools around and playing with the locks. Not surprisingly, when these sounds and movements occurred, the air pressure and temperatures in the room changed. The most recent reports from the gallery seem to indicate that the ghost activity has abated. Perhaps the energy that manifested those restless spirits has now dissipated. This story takes place in the North Pacific in the vicinity of British Columbia. The ghostly fate of the Valencia. A ghost ship or phantom ship is one of the oldest and eeriest of all paranormal phenomena. Sailors have reported seeing specific vessels, even hearing the officers on board bark orders at the crew, only to discover that the particular ship that they identified sank some time before. Some sightings happen over and over again in a specific spot. Others are seen once and then never seen again. Such sightings are reported from all around the world, including the North Pacific in the vicinity of British Columbia. Like the tale of the Sea King, the ghost story of the Valencia also began in 1906. As the passenger ship left San Francisco, destined for Seattle, the Valencia, however, never made it to Seattle, but ran aground on a submerged reef at Pachina Point, the graveyard of the Pacific, just up island from the entrance to Jean de Fuca Strat, which she would have had to traverse on her way to Puget Sound and her destination. The ship's captain, an experienced seaman named Johnson, ordered the engines reversed at full power. The ship shuddered mightily and then began inching backward. However, she had been badly damaged by the grounding, and she rapidly began filling with water. Johnson knew that there was no point in trying to save the ship's hull at this point. It could never be repaired, so he turned his efforts to saving the lives of his passengers and crew. His only hope now, he believed, was full speed ahead in the hopes of beaching the Valencia and disembarking all on board. Captain Johnson's plans might have worked at a different location, but all that he succeeded in doing here was to lodge his ship at a completely inaccessible site. He signaled for help from nearby ships, but because of the tides and rocks, none was able to get close enough to help the struggling people. The crews of rescue ships had to sit nearby, helplessly watching the dreadful plight of those trapped on board the Valencia. In the end, only 37 souls managed to escape the shipwreck alive. Eventually, the ship, city of Topeka, was able to approach what was left of the Valencia and began the gruesome salvage process. The first job was to get the bodies off the stranded ship. After this duty was attended to, and everything of value had been removed from the Valencia, the Topeka headed away from the wreck. All on board were somber and knew that their responsibilities included informing others on the sea of the tragedy. When they saw the first ship approach, they slowed in order to communicate the terrible news. As the vessel got closer, those on deck were stunned. The approaching ship was the Valencia herself, or more correctly, her ghost. The two ships sailed away from one another. The city of Topeka to her earthly duties, the Valencia to her unearthly ones. That sighting of the Valencia's ghost was only the first. Sailors on board going liners occasionally spotted a wreck on the rocks near where the Valencia went down. The sight haunted anyone who witnessed it, for they could clearly make out the passengers and crew clinging to the riggings as their doomed vessel was battered mercilessly by the ocean's raging waves. In addition, people who fish in the area have reported seeing spectral lifeboats managed by skeletons rowing into eternity near the site of tragedy. As there have been no recent reports of sightings, we can hope that all those who met such a tragic end on board the ill-fated Valencia have now gone to their eternal rest.